Hello and good morning everyone. My name is Lyncoln De Mello and welcome to this webinar hosted by Brennan IT on best practice data protection. We'll just give another few more seconds for other attendees to join. They're just joining now and then we'll kick off. Right, let's get going. I hope you're having a good morning and thanks again for joining us. Before we get started, just some few housekeeping items. If there's any questions, please just type them into the questions section of the GoToWebinar dashboard and I'll get to them at the end. The presentation and the recording of the webinar as well will be distributed to all the registered parties, and that'll be happening tomorrow. So without further ado, let me just jump straight into the content. So just before we get into the guts of it, I just want to go through some audience and assumptions for the people that are attending today. So I'm assuming that you represent the IT side or the business services department of a business in Australia, or medium-sized business in Australia. You already have an appreciation and understanding of the importance of protecting data and business continuity. Most of your IT infrastructure resides on-premise today or in a co-location facility, and it's self-managed or possibly managed through a services partner. You're also looking at ways in which IT can help to grow your overall business. So the agenda for today, as per the meeting invite, is to cover the value and confidence of having your backup and disaster recovery delivered as a service and professionally managed. We're going to do more of a technical dive into a differentiator that we have on the disaster recovery side, and that's around continuous replication, simulation of DR, and rollback. I'm also going to cover hybrid backup to minimize the cost of long-term retention, which is a requirement for many of the industries right today. That's long-term data retention. So managing backups and DR, hopefully most of you are familiar with this, in that many mid-sized businesses today have their internal IT department managing their disaster recovery. They also manage off-site backup copies, which is often cumbersome, it's disruptive, and over time it can be costly as well. Disaster recovery that's done in-house requires business to stand up virtually a secondary data center or a secondary site with a very similar spec kit to the production, which is costly. It requires another set of infrastructure to be managed, but above all, will it actually work doing disaster recovery yourself? Will it actually work when you need to call on it? There's often many assumptions and oversights made during disaster recovery testing in a design phase to start with, and that's assuming that disaster recovery testing even happens thoroughly and regularly. In a true disaster, you really have to ask yourself if you'll have access to the tools and the systems you need to invoke your DR plan in the first place. For example, if you had a building flood or a fire and there was sprinklers activated and you had to evacuate, your IT department may not actually have access to their PCs or tools they need to bring up their secondary site, or they may have tokens and things like that that are required for two-factor authentication that would have been left behind in the evacuation. So this is where mitigating risks in disaster recovery and risk restoration, and what can you do to address those things. The first thing you could do really is to turn to a managed cloud or backup disaster recovery solution. So getting another independent set of people and infrastructure to get your data back or your business back up and running. At this point, I just want to ask a question to the audience. See a poll come up. So who already utilizes cloud for data protection? If you could just answer that for me, I'll give you a few seconds. Okay, thanks very much. So day to day, if you have a services provider managing your backup and disaster recovery, it does take away some of the cumbersome work that that occupies your day to day and frees up the IT department to be a bit more strategic in value adding to your business. At Brennan IT, we offer cloud backup services based on two leading software companies. One's called Commvault and the other one is Veeam. Quite not so much household names, but in the IT arena, they're very well-known brands. What we do in terms of a differentiator in the backup arena is offer a monthly write-to-tape service, which is built into the proposition. And if you do require your long-term retention, say beyond a couple of months, one year or 7 years, it's required in financial services and health, and more in education as well. That hybrid approach really allows you to reduce your cost of retention, because it's not always on disk, and long-term retention via tape is still the cheapest way of executing that. Our cloud disaster recovery product is quite different to a lot of other software vendors and others as a service solutions in this arena, in that it uses leading-edge hypervisor level continuous replication technology. And that's developed by a company called Zerto, and it gives you extremely low RPOs, or recovery point objectives, and RTOs. In summary, it translates to minimal disruption to your business in the event of an IT disaster. And that's where we're going to deep dive into right now. So we're going to go down a more technical journey and look at a product called Zerto, which is the software we use to execute on our cloud disaster recovery service. So at this point in time, I just asked another poll. If you could just answer that question for me. Who has heard of Zerto before? Thanks very much. So let's just look at how Zerto works. In a traditional replication disaster recovery software, they all effectively have one objective, and that's to get servers and the data from a production site to a secondary site. And that's usually executed by storage-based replication, or SAN replication, or snapshotting technology. And the issue really is that over time, that the replication was happening in the wrong place. It was happening at the storage layer. So a lot of things were being missed. Now what Zerto does really is brings the replication up to the hypervisor level rather than the storage level. So all changes are then replicated at the hypervisor level from the production site to the disaster recovery site via the software. So as a broad concept, that's the way it works. So let's go into that a little bit further. This slide is titled Enterprise Class Virtual Replication, because Zerto really brings a lot more to the game than traditional replication technology. So where it starts is at the hypervisor level, replicating block level changes, and gets continuously replicating block level changes. This means your RPOs, or recovery point objectives, go down to seconds, and for higher rate of change servers or applications, it's minutes, as opposed to snapshotting technology, which you really don't want to be executing more than every half an hour or an hour. In reality, it translates to much lower data loss, as I mentioned before, and you can confidently meet service level agreements or objectives inside your business yourself. So as those block level changes are being replicated from the production VMs down to its own local storage and across the LAN to the backup sites, because it's using continuous replication, there's no snapshots, there's no slowdown in production platform performance. That's what we mean by enterprise class virtual replication. That's available to medium-sized businesses today. So that happens continuously, very little low downtime. It's also storage agnostic. So it doesn't matter what underlying storage you have, which a lot of snapshotting technologies are dependent on the storage vendor underneath, it's transparent to that because it's happening at the hypervisor level. And it has automatic VM disk and setting conversion, so it doesn't really care all that much about the hypervisor itself. It has any-to-any hypervisor level support. So for the big ticket items, VMware or Hyper-V, yes, you're covered. So let's see how that works in a few scenarios. Well, the first obvious scenario is to actually get yourself back up or to recover after a disaster. And the purpose of this slide is that in the first scenario, your VMs are back up, or virtual machines are back up at the backup and disaster recovery site, which is the cloud, or the Brennan IT cloud. And part of that recovery process initially would have been determining the boot order of the VMs, mapping all the VMs to an application, re-IP scripts and validation. So when you bring up the environment, it's application consistent. You don't have issues with virtual machines booting up out of order, out of sync, which causes application data to be corrupted or the application to be unstable to start with, which is a very big benefit and a differentiator to traditional technology. So all the orchestration, all that's built in. So that's the first use case, and the most practical one for this tool. But it doesn't necessarily have to be only used for recovering from a disaster. It can be also used for highly comprehensive disaster recovery testing, or simulation as I prefer to call it. And that simulation can happen or needs to happen in an isolated network. So routing is allowed between the virtual machines, but there's no routing between the virtual machines and the backup or disaster recovery site, i.e. the Brennan IT cloud and the production network. So that happens in isolation, as demarked by the red boxes. We can verify that everything works. End users are able to SSL VPN in and get into the disaster recovery environment there. But the virtual machines in production still keep on running. There's no disruption to BAU. The other application really is a migration tool. So you could use Zerto to actually use hypervisor level replication to migrate VMs into an infrastructure as a service platform play. And over time, most businesses seem to be heading that way. So it's not just for disaster recovery. And it can be done very quickly as well. You can set up jobs and have them replicate over time, and the whole VM stack and storage is replicated to the site. And lastly, coming back to the disaster recovery scenario, when you want to fail back to the production site, so everything is restored back at the production site, you don't no longer want to run off the disaster recovery item, that failback happens very efficiently because only the changes from when the last successful replication happened are failed back. So there's no need to reseed the entire environment, and you can pick up where you left off, plus all the changes that happened after that for the time you were running from the DR site, i.e. the Brennan IT cloud. So it's a comprehensive solution for disaster recovery and also for simulation and also VM migration as well. So at this point in time, I just wanted to cover another possible application, and this one warranted its own slide, just simply because it's so common today. So Cryptolocker or ransomware is out there. Imagine that part of your environment was impacted by Cryptolocker somewhere in the late afternoon, and you want to get back to a point in time just before that. What Zerto does is, in that continuous replication phase, it's constantly journaling. So you're able to simply wind back the clock up to 5 days, although that has a storage implication, up to 5 days. Hopefully you've been alerted to around a Cryptolocker event in your environment well before 5 days, typically hours. Then you can simply wind back in time. At this point in time, I just want to check as well, who has actually heard of Cryptolocker? If you just please answer that. Couple more seconds to answer the poll and I'll close it. Thank you. So once you just wind back in time, you can recover or go to a point in time before Cryptolocker. So almost to a degree pretend as if it didn't happen and pick up your data set and from that point in time. A Cryptolocker could be isolated to a site, so you could do site level recovery or rewind. You could be isolated to an application, so you can only rewind that application. You could be mapped just to a particular virtual machine, so you could rewind just that virtual machine. And very interestingly, it could be down to just a file or even a folder, so you could just recover that file or that folder. It doesn't require your entire business to be rewound back in time. So it's another interesting application. So in summary then, we're not going to talk too much more on this topic. I'll just wrap things up. So we'd like you as business IT or business services advocates within your own companies to have greater confidence in data protection and successful execution of disaster recovery by really considering a cloud-based backup and disaster recovery solution. A cloud service with a monthly write-out to tape feature for backup can significantly reduce the cost of long-term data retention, as opposed to a lot of other public type services out there where the data perpetually resides on disk, and you just pay for that storage, so that can add up over time. But we offer that monthly data write-out feature. Disaster recovery is now revolutionized with Zerto, with hypervisor level replication. I hope you've got some insights into that and the benefits of that as opposed to traditional snapshot technology. You can get RPOs down to seconds or minutes. For all practical purposes, it's minutes. And application consistent recovery, not just virtual machine coming up in whatever predetermined or random order. So actual applications can come up in sync as they were prior to disaster. And I also mentioned that Zerto is not just a disaster recovery tool, but can be very useful in simulating disaster recovery, migrating VMs from on-premise to another site or to a cloud infrastructure as a service product, and also it rolls back very efficiently. So that's the end of the content in the webinar. If there's any questions, please feel free to type them in now into the questions bar. Okay, I have a question around the cost structure and how backup and disaster recovery are priced as a cloud service. So at Brennan IT on the backup side, it depends on whether you use Commvault or Veeam as to how the pricing is structured. For Commvault, you basically pay for the amount of data that's protected at the front end. And the price then varies based on your backup policy. Whether you want a basic policy, that's just to keep backups every day for a week before they're overwritten, or if you want a much longer retention policy, like keep backups every day, summarize them to a week, monthly write out to tape, and that tape's stored for 7 years. And that's how it is. And the unit pricing is simply pay $1 per gigabyte amount based on the front-end storage, as I mentioned. For Veeam, it simply is pay for the total amount of storage consumed in a compressed form on the cloud service. That's on the backup side. Disaster recovery is also very similar in that you just pay a cost per VM and the total amount of storage that we store on the back end. The basic price already includes proactive monitoring, access to our service desk, and it also includes one disaster recovery simulation per year. That's with our assistance. Any further questions? I have one. What's the first step in getting a disaster recovery solution? Assuming you don't really have one in place today, the first step is really to have a discussion with us to understand your requirements and also to identify the assets and the servers that you have in place that you would consider to be mission critical to your trading. And then we go about sizing the solution and put forward a proposal, and then we execute from there. Disaster recovery requires a private IP or wide area network connection to where your production system lives or near to it. And that's something that we offer in-house as well, because we have a full-fledged data networking practice. Okay, thanks very much for your time. I don't have any other further questions presented at this point in time, so please have a good day, and we'll see you at the next webinar. Just a reminder as well, the follow-up on the webinar will be tomorrow, as I said in the beginning, and the recording will be available, and the whole PowerPoint deck will be available too. Thanks very much.